How does someone become so valuable to the Yakuza that they make millions, and then become so dangerous that they have to be removed? It's a question that scratches beneath the surface of organized crime's polished veneer, where power and loyalty intertwine in a perilous dance. This is not a story about reckless violence or loud showdowns. This is about a man whose quiet efficiency generated fortunes for operations linked to the Yakuza, a man whose worth wasn't measured in threats or intimidation, but in steady streams of money and an uncanny ability to keep things running smoothly. In the shadowy corridors where illicit deals thrive, this man was neither a flashy boss nor a reckless enforcer. He didn't command armies or make headlines. Instead, he was the linchpin of a complex financial network, a master of keeping the system balanced, the money flowing, and the unwanted attention at bay. His value was in his discretion and discipline, a rare breed in a world often defined by chaos and unpredictability. For years, he was trusted implicitly, his presence a quiet assurance that the wheels would keep turning without a hitch. Trust in this world is a currency almost as precious as cash. It grows slowly, through repeated success and demonstrated reliability. This man amassed trust not by flaunting power, but by delivering results consistently and without fanfare. His access expanded as his reputation for dependability spread, granting him glimpses into operations and knowledge that few outsiders, and even fewer insiders, ever encountered. Yet the very knowledge that elevated him also sowed the seeds of his eventual downfall. In the clandestine world of organized crime, information is a double-edged sword, powerful but perilous. There is an unspoken rule that value inside such organizations is never permanent. Usefulness is the currency on which survival depends, and once that usefulness diminishes or morphs into liability, the consequences are swift and unforgiving. This man's story is a study in that transient nature of trust and utility. His role was simple but vital: make the system work. For a long time it did, but the moment the scales tipped, when his presence shifted from asset to risk, everything changed. The silence began to grow where communication once flourished. Routines subtly altered, and an invisible line was crossed. What followed wasn't a sudden betrayal, but a gradual unraveling, a shadow creeping into the light. His journey reveals the precarious balance between profit and peril, loyalty and suspicion. In the world of the Yakuza, being valuable is a delicate condition, one that can evaporate without warning, leaving even the most trusted figures exposed and vulnerable. This is a story not just about crime and money, but about the fragile nature of power itself and the hidden costs of being indispensable in a merciless underworld. As we delve deeper into these accounts, consider subscribing to follow the unfolding narratives centered on Yakuza operations, where internal betrayals and the silent calculus of money dictate every move. These stories reveal a system designed less to protect individuals and more to preserve the structures that sustain organized crime. Each case uncovers how loyalty is conditional and protection is a currency traded in shadows. Within this realm, power is maintained through a network of unspoken rules, where silence often weighs heavier than violence, and allegiance can shift as swiftly as the tides. The precarious balance between trust and treachery is never stable, and those who once seemed indispensable can find themselves isolated in an instant. As we continue, observe how these patterns emerge not merely as isolated incidents, but as part of a broader mechanism that enforces control and perpetuates influence. This investigation does not seek to sensationalize, but to examine the subtle dynamics that govern such clandestine organizations. The betrayals and manipulations are not random acts of cruelty, but strategic moves within a larger game, where each participant navigates a dangerous landscape defined by survival and dominance. Understanding these layers is crucial to grasping how organized crime endures, adapts, and exploits the vulnerabilities within its own ranks. By tracing these developments, the narrative exposes the inherent fragility behind the apparent strength of the Yakuza. It is a world where power is both a shield and a target, and the cost of being indispensable can ultimately mean becoming expendable. Through careful analysis of these cases, we gain insight into how these criminal systems function, not as chaotic violence, but as calculated enterprises that protect their own interests above all else. Within the intricate machinery of the Yakuza's operations, this individual was neither a figurehead nor a decision-maker wielding visible authority. Instead, his true power lay in the quiet orchestration of systems that ensured the entire network functioned without disruption. He was the linchpin in a complex web where logistics, finances, and front businesses intersected seamlessly, and his role was indispensable precisely because he avoided the spotlight. From a logistical standpoint, he managed the flow of goods and information essential to the Yakuza's diverse enterprises. Whether overseeing shipments that masked illicit products within legitimate cargo or coordinating the movement of personnel across various territories, his attention to detail prevented bottlenecks that could expose vulnerabilities. He understood that the smooth transfer of resources was not just about efficiency, but about minimizing risk and maintaining operational security. His ability to anticipate challenges and adapt routes or methods helped preserve the fragile balance between visibility and invisibility, a critical factor in a world where exposure meant immediate danger. In terms of money flow, he was the architect of discrete financial channels that kept the organization's funds both liquid and shielded. Rather than handling cash transactions directly, he devised systems that laundered money through legitimate business fronts, using layered accounts and complex transfers to obscure the origins and destinations of funds. His work ensured that profits from illicit activities could be reinvested into the network without attracting undue attention from law enforcement or financial regulators. His proficiency in navigating the gray areas of finance made him a trusted figure, not because he controlled wealth, but because he guaranteed its steady and secure circulation. Front businesses under his supervision served as more than mere covers. They were integral components within a broader strategy of concealment and legitimacy. He managed these enterprises with a focus on operational efficiency, ensuring they appeared viable to outsiders while funneling resources back into the criminal enterprise. Restaurants, construction companies, and trading firms under his watch were not just facades, but functioning entities whose revenues blended seamlessly with illicit profits. His role demanded a pragmatic approach, keeping these fronts credible without unnecessary expansion or extravagance that might draw suspicion. This balance of authenticity and caution reinforced trust among higher-ups who relied on him to maintain a stable base from which other activities could proceed. Importantly, his value derived from his ability to remain invisible. Unlike the charismatic bosses or enforcers, his work was characterized by silence and discretion. By avoiding direct confrontation and public attention, he lowered the overall risk profile of the organization. His invisibility was a form of protection, both for himself and for the network. In a system where exposure could lead to violent repercussions or legal consequences, his low profile was a strategic asset. The trust he earned came from consistent reliability rather than boldness. He was the steady hand behind the scenes, ensuring that the gears of the Yakuza's criminal enterprise turned smoothly. His position generated steady profit, not through flashiness, but through meticulous oversight and systematized processes. By making complex operations predictable and manageable, he reduced waste, prevented costly mistakes, and allowed the organization to scale its activities with confidence. The Yakuza depended on him not because he commanded loyalty through force, but because he delivered results through precision. In essence, he was the unseen backbone of a network where chaos was disguised as control, and where success depended on making the illicit appear ordinary and unremarkable. Money flowed not in sudden bursts or dramatic heists, but through steady, unremarkable channels that blended seamlessly into the fabric of everyday commerce. Each transaction was a small, almost imperceptible ripple in a vast ocean of legitimate exchanges. There was no need for flashy displays or brazen risks. The true art lay in the quiet accumulation, the tireless repetition of processes that seemed routine, almost banal. In this way, the funds grew not by spectacle, but by scale, a steady multiplication that escaped notice precisely because it was so consistent. Behind the scenes, countless small operations unfolded like clockwork. Front businesses, laundromats, convenience stores, import-export firms functioned as genuine enterprises with real customers, real sales, and real paperwork. Their daily ledgers showed profits that were plausible and modest, never raising eyebrows. The money funneled through them was a drip rather than a flood, concealed within the normal ebb and flow of commerce. No one outside the inner circle could point to anything suspicious because there was simply nothing suspicious to find. The repetition of these transactions was crucial. Deposits were made at regular intervals. Invoices were issued and paid on schedule, and payrolls ran like clockwork. Each step was deliberately designed to mimic legitimate business practices, creating a rhythm so steady that it lulled any potential observer into complacency. This relentlessness was a shield. Attention, after all, was the enemy. The more ordinary the pattern, the less likely anyone would look too closely. Profit, not violence, was the hallmark of success. Unlike the flashy headlines of turf wars or dramatic confrontations, the gains here were measured in quiet increments, percentages on balance sheets, margins on shipments, fractions of a cent on currency exchanges. The organization's leader understood that maintaining this calm surface was far more valuable than asserting dominance through force. Power was exercised not by intimidation, but by the steady, undeniable growth of capital that allowed for strategic investments and subtle influence. The scale was staggering precisely because it was diffused. Thousands of transactions, each unremarkable on its own, combined into a colossal flow of resources. This web of small, interconnected activities provided not only financial gain, but also resilience. If one node in the network attracted attention or faltered, the system adjusted seamlessly, rerouting funds through alternative channels without disrupting the overall momentum. Hidden in plain sight, the money became a shadow presence. Never flashy, never loud, but always there. Attention was avoided like a contagion. Audits were anticipated and planned for. Inspections were treated as routine obstacles to be managed with paperwork and patience. Silence was cultivated. Conversations about the money were sparse, coded, and always grounded in the language of legitimate business. In this manner, vast sums were generated and consolidated without triggering alarms. The organization's true power rested in its ability to blend into the background, to operate within the gray areas where legality and illegality intersected. Profit was the metric that defined success, not the violence or spectacle that outsiders might expect, but the quiet, relentless expansion of wealth beneath the surface, invisible because it was so perfectly ordinary. Within the Yakuza's intricate web, trust is less a function of formal rank than a currency earned through proximity and indispensable service. Access without explicit authority is a nuanced phenomenon, often granted not by decree, but through silent acknowledgement of necessity. Those who handle money, for instance, occupy a paradoxical position. They are neither the highest in command nor mere foot soldiers, yet their role demands intimate involvement with operations that others only glimpse from afar. This proximity breeds an inadvertent accumulation of knowledge, a byproduct as inevitable as the flow of cash itself. The individual at the center of these financial dealings becomes a repository of information, not through ambition or overt power plays, but by virtue of being essential. They're the quiet nodes through which the organization's lifeblood passes. As money moves, so does knowledge about transactions, alliances, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. The silence maintained around these exchanges is paramount. Discretion serves as a protective veil, allowing the organization to thrive without exposing its inner workings. This silence is not enforced by rank, but by mutual understanding. Revealing too much risks destabilizing the delicate balance that sustains the network. Trust, therefore, is less about formal titles and more about demonstrated reliability and necessity. The Yakuza's structure accommodates this by tacitly recognizing the unique position of those who work behind the scenes. Their access is granted on the premise that their indispensability outweighs the threat posed by their knowledge. This creates a fragile equilibrium where access and silence coexist, each reinforcing the other. The individual's role is a constant negotiation between being close enough to see and distant enough to remain unseen. Handling money within such a framework is inherently fraught. The volume and complexity of financial exchanges mean that complete ignorance is impossible. The individual's awareness expands naturally with their responsibilities, absorbing layers of organizational intelligence simply by managing the flow of funds. This knowledge is not wielded as power overtly, but held quietly, a silent understanding that shapes decisions and interactions. The organization counts on this discretion, trusting that the individual's necessity binds them more strongly than any formal oath. Furthermore, the trust extended is a reflection of shared risk. Those entrusted with access are cognizant that their exposure could invite suspicion or reprisal, compelling them to observe a code of silence that transcends personal loyalty. The interplay between access, proximity, and silence becomes a mechanism of control, less visible than rank, but more effective in safeguarding the organization's continuity. This dynamic fosters an environment where knowledge is both a burden and a shield, carried with an unspoken acceptance of the stakes involved. In this way, the Yakuza's internal trust operates as a subtle, living system. It is shaped not by hierarchical imposition, but through the organic necessity of roles that demand closeness to the organization's core functions. The individual's journey through this system reflects a quiet mastery of balance, knowing enough to be indispensable, yet restrained enough to remain trusted. Such trust, born from access without formal authority, becomes one of the organization's most resilient assets, enabling it to maintain its shadowy dominion beneath the surface of everyday life. Days folded into weeks with an almost imperceptible shift in the rhythms that once defined his place. At first, it was subtle. A glance held a beat too long before drifting away. A voice that once welcomed his input, now brushing past with a distracted nod. Meetings he used to attend, without question, began to convene just beyond his reach, announced in passing or scheduled when he was already occupied. No words were exchanged about these changes, no explanations offered. The absence of confrontation made the transformation all the more insidious. His messages, once answered promptly, lingered in inboxes before vanishing into silence. When he arrived at familiar locations, the rooms felt smaller. Conversations paused momentarily before resuming without him. Invitations that had been automatic now required explicit requests, which seemed to fall on ears that heard but chose not to act. It was as though the invisible walls around him were closing in, not with force, but with a patient, deliberate pressure that left no room for protest. The routines that had been his anchor began to unravel. A trusted colleague who once exchanged coded remarks with ease now skirted around his presence, offering brief, clipped responses that carried no hint of their previous camaraderie. Tasks he once executed with quiet authority were quietly reassigned, often under the guise of operational shifts or efficiency improvements. His suggestions, once catalysts for swift action, were met with polite nods and then quietly shelved. The very skills that had made him invaluable were now perceived as vulnerabilities, potential cracks in a carefully constructed facade. No formal statements marked this transition. There were no memos or directives. The organization's silence was deliberate, a calculated move to erase his influence without provoking scrutiny or dissent. In this absence of acknowledgement, the message was clear. Usefulness had a shelf life, and he had quietly outlived his. The trust that had once shielded him now became a liability, a risk too great to ignore. He found himself navigating a landscape where presence was no longer a guarantee of relevance. Doors that had opened effortlessly now required permission. and permissions were withheld without explanation. The shadowy currents that sustained the organization shifted around him, leaving him isolated in a space that once felt integral. He became an echo in the corridors he had once walked with confidence, a ghost tethered to memories of a role that was fading into obscurity. Yet, despite the growing distance, no accusations were leveled. No fingers pointed. The transition was as quiet as the system itself, efficient, unyielding, and final. His value had dissolved not through failure or betrayal, but through the inexorable logic of necessity. In the world of shadows, where survival depended on seamless adaptability, standing still was the greatest risk of all. His knowledge, once a prized asset, had morphed into a liability that no amount of past loyalty could shield him from. The very breadth of his understanding, the layers of insight accumulated through overlapping roles, created a labyrinthine web of exposure. Each thread represented a door to forbidden rooms. Rooms where too much was known, too much remembered, too much connected. In an environment where information was currency and discretion the highest form of currency exchange, possessing too much knowledge was akin to carrying a beacon in the dark. It illuminated every hidden passage, every secret meeting, every vulnerability within the organization's intricate framework. This internal risk wasn't born from disloyalty or malicious intent, but from the sheer scope of what he had absorbed. His position had required him to bridge multiple domains, operational, strategic, and covert, blurring the lines between roles that were meant to be compartmentalized. That overlap, initially a strength, became the root of his peril. The more spheres he touched, the more eyes he attracted, and the more sensitive his existence became. Within the clandestine corridors of the shadow crimes world, knowledge was a double-edged sword. It empowered, but it also endangered. Those who saw him as indispensable began to see him as a threat, not because he betrayed them, but because the knowledge he carried was a threat in itself. The exposure was not merely external, but profoundly internal. Every hierarchy thrives on controlled ignorance. It is the scaffolding that upholds order and discipline. When one individual transcends that ignorance, voluntarily or otherwise, the structure trembles. The organization's survival depended on the ability to forget, to compartmentalize, and to replace. His continued presence, rich with information spanning too many layers, was an anomaly that defied this principle. No matter how steadfast his allegiance had been, loyalty could not override the calculus of risk. Trust was transient in these shadows, and the cost of misplaced trust was invariably paid in silence. Moreover, the value he embodied was not eternal. In the fluid dynamics of covert operations, value had an expiration date, a timeline defined not by age or tenure, but by relevance and risk. As new players emerged, as strategies shifted and technologies evolved, yesterday's indispensable expert became today's vulnerability. His knowledge, once a fortress, began to feel like a cage. The organization's cold pragmatism dictated that usefulness was finite, and once that threshold was crossed, the calculus shifted from protection to containment. It was a silent verdict, unspoken yet absolute. He understood this shift, not through confrontation or accusation, but through the subtle distancing that felt like a slow unraveling. The absence of blame was not mercy, it was inevitability. In the shadows, where survival hinged on adaptability, the true danger was standing still, clinging to yesterday's value while the world moved on. His knowledge had become dangerous not because it was misused, but because it could no longer be contained, controlled, or forgotten. Loyalty, once his shield, had dissolved in the relentless march of necessity, leaving him exposed to the cold reality that in the realm of secrets, knowing too much is the greatest risk of all. The process of removal began quietly, almost imperceptibly, long before any physical action was taken. At first, the man noticed subtle shifts, conversations that no longer included him, meetings held without invitation, and messages left unanswered. These fractures in communication were the first signs of his gradual erasure from the network he once navigated with assuredness. His calls went unanswered, his presence ignored, and the channels he had relied on for information slowly closed off, as if an invisible wall was being raised around him. This social isolation was deliberate, a calculated distancing designed to sever ties without the need for overt confrontation. In the world he inhabited, such removal was a precursor to disappearance, a way to strip a person of relevance, influence, and protection before any physical elimination could be contemplated. The loss of contact was not chaotic or accidental. It was methodical. His allies ceased to reach out, their loyalties redirected or extinguished, and any semblance of camaraderie faded into silence. Even those who once shared whispered confidences now spoke in hushed tones behind closed doors, careful to exclude him from the web of trust. Access, once freely granted, was rescinded piece by piece. Places that had been familiar, back rooms, safe houses, trusted meeting points, no longer welcomed him. The infrastructure that supported his existence in this clandestine world systematically withdrew behind locked doors and guarded thresholds. His identification, once unquestioned, became invalid. Invitations vanished. Doors that once opened at his approach now remained firmly shut. This loss of access was more than physical. It was symbolic. Each denied entry marked another step toward invisibility, another layer of erasure. Silence became his constant companion. Where once the hum of whispered plans and coded messages filled the air, now there was only emptiness. Attempts to reach out were met with cold indifference or complete non-response. The absence of sound echoed louder than any accusation, a void that communicated rejection without words. In this silence, the man found himself increasingly isolated, stripped of the social fabric that had once shielded and defined him. The network that had sustained him now turned its back, leaving him to confront the void alone. This removal from the social sphere was not merely a tactic, it was a signal. It marked him as expendable, a liability to be quietly excised. Before any physical steps could be taken, the damage was done in the realm of relationships, the true battleground where trust is earned and lost. In such a world, being forgotten is the first step toward being erased. The gradual isolation ensured that when the final act came, it would meet little resistance, no loyal voices to raise alarm or call for justice. The man's disappearance would be as seamless as the silence that preceded it. For those who follow the undercurrents of power and betrayal within secretive organizations, these patterns of social removal are telling. They reveal the mechanisms by which shadows consume their own, erasing those who have outlived their usefulness or become threats. If you find this glimpse into the quiet, calculated process of erasure compelling, consider subscribing to Shadow Crimes. There, stories unfold about the intricate operations of the Yakuza, the internal betrayals that fracture criminal empires, and the systems designed to eliminate assets without trace. Each narrative pulls back the veil on the hidden world where loyalty is currency, and silence often speaks louder than violence. Within the shadowed corridors of organized crime, decisions to remove an individual are far from impulsive acts driven by anger or personal vendettas. Instead, they arise from a meticulous evaluation rooted in risk management, operational stability, and long-term strategic interests. The calculus is clinical, weighing potential threats against the value the individual still represents to the organization, with emotional impulses carefully set aside. At the core of this decision-making process lies a comprehensive risk assessment. Leaders analyze whether the presence of a particular member jeopardizes ongoing operations, exposes vulnerabilities to law enforcement scrutiny, or threatens alliances with other factions. Such evaluations consider not only the immediate repercussions, but also the ripple effects across the network. For instance, an individual who has accumulated significant information or whose actions have drawn unwanted attention may become a liability too great to ignore. even if their activities continue to generate revenue. Profitability, a primary metric in most business contexts, holds limited sway in this environment. High earnings do not confer immunity. If sustaining a relationship with a profitable but unpredictable actor risks destabilizing the entire enterprise, the rational choice may be severance. This underscores a fundamental principle. Survival of the organization supersedes individual gain. The calculus incorporates factors such as the individual's reliability, potential for cooperation under pressure, and likelihood of triggering retaliatory conflicts. In these calculations, the organization's longevity takes precedence over short-term financial gain. Intelligence gathering plays a crucial role in informing these decisions. Continuous monitoring of behavior, communications, and external pressures helps to identify patterns indicative of future threats. The organization often employs trusted intermediaries and surveillance methods to gauge loyalty and detect signs of compromise. When indicators suggest that an individual's continued existence poses uncontrollable risks, discussions escalate to leadership councils where consensus is sought. The process is deliberate, designed to avoid rash actions that could invite internal dissent or external retaliation. Furthermore, the decision to eliminate a member incorporates an analysis of alternative solutions. Options such as reassignment, increased supervision, or temporary isolation are weighed against the cost and effectiveness of removal. Sometimes, the choice to act decisively is influenced by precedent and the necessity to maintain discipline and deterrence within the ranks. Allowing a known risk to persist unchecked can embolden others, undermining the organization's structural integrity. Importantly, this decision is not a reflection of personal animosity. Rather, it is a strategic maneuver to preserve order and minimize exposure. In this context, eliminating someone is a methodical step taken to neutralize a threat that cannot be otherwise contained. The organization's survival depends on such measured calculations, where every move is scrutinized for its potential to either reinforce or destabilize the delicate balance of power. In sum, the elimination decision within organized crime is a product of sober analysis focused on risk mitigation. It transcends emotional response and evaluates the interplay of threat, value, and organizational resilience. Profit alone does not dictate survival. Rather, it is the careful orchestration of risk control and strategic foresight that guides these final, irrevocable choices. The moment he was removed, the underworld didn't flinch. The gears of the operation, honed through years of ruthless efficiency, kept turning without pause. No grand gestures, no dramatic upheavals, just a seamless transition that spoke volumes about the true nature of the enterprise. Money, the lifeblood of the network, continued to flow through the channels as if nothing had changed. Transactions were processed, shipments moved, and communications relayed with the same cold precision as before. The void left by one man's absence was swiftly filled, as though he had been a mere cog, easily swapped out without sacrificing the machine's momentum. Within hours, new faces emerged behind screens and in shadowed rooms, their roles predefined and their instructions clear. The intricate web of contacts, accounts, and alliances remained intact, a testament to the system's resilience more than any individual's influence. Those who had once been indispensable were now reminders of a bygone chapter, their value measured only by their replacement's ability to uphold the status quo. In this world, loyalty was a currency as fleeting as trust, and no one was beyond being discarded if the risk outweighed the worth. The organization's adaptability was its greatest strength. Protocols designed to anticipate disruption kicked in automatically. Backup leaders stepped forward, communication lines rerouted, and financial streams recalibrated. The operation was not a fragile ecosystem dependent on personalities. It was a robust network engineered to absorb shocks and maintain equilibrium. This calculated detachment ensured that personal loss did not translate into operational failure, underscoring a brutal reality. People, no matter their past contributions, are ultimately expendable. This cold pragmatism extended beyond simply filling vacancies. Every replacement was chosen for their efficiency, their discretion, and their ability to blend into the machinery without hesitation or ego. The organization's success hinged on this unyielding prioritization of function over sentiment. Those who had once commanded respect and wielded power were now reduced to cautionary tales. Examples of how the system outlasts individuals by design. Despite this swift restoration of order, subtle shifts in dynamics rippled beneath the surface. New players brought fresh methods, occasionally altering minor processes or forging new alliances to strengthen the network's reach. Yet these changes were incremental and tactical, never disrupting the overarching stability. The operations continuity was maintained not by nostalgia for past leadership, but through unwavering commitment to the mission's core, preserving the flow of resources and minimizing exposure. In the end, the aftermath was a stark reminder of the impersonal nature of organized crime. It was a world where human value was secondary to the imperatives of survival and profit. The organization moved forward, unscathed and unyielding, proving that in this realm, the only constant was the relentless, unbroken march of money, and that people, no matter how valued, were always replaceable. In the ruthless world of the Yakuza, making millions was never a guarantee of safety. It was, in fact, often the very thing that sealed one's fate. The profits generated, the deals brokered, and the operations orchestrated all marked an individual as valuable. But that value was a fragile and fleeting commodity. Usefulness, no matter how grand, was always temporary. The moment someone amassed enough knowledge or control to pose a potential threat, they transformed from an asset into a liability. Knowledge, in this shadowy realm, was a double-edged sword, both the key to power and the harbinger of downfall. Loyalty, often romanticized in stories about organized crime, proved to be a hollow illusion. It was not allegiance that ensured survival, nor was it the profits one brought to the table. Instead, survival hinged on remaining expendable, on mastering the art of invisibility within the machinery of crime. The Yakuza's unyielding logic is simple and brutal. Those who become indispensable invite suspicion. They become targets for elimination, not protection. The organization's machinery grinds forward relentlessly, replacing flesh and blood with efficiency and cold calculation. No individual is too important to be discarded when the balance of power shifts. This cold calculus strips away any notion of honor or respect. It reduces people to roles and roles to commodities, always ready to be reassigned, replaced, or removed. The aftermath of this story lays bare the impersonal nature of organized crime, where human worth is measured not by character or loyalty, but by cold utility. In this unforgiving world, anything beyond usefulness is dangerous knowledge, and everything is fleeting. The brutal truth is that survival means embracing expendability, shedding significance, and relinquishing any illusion of permanence. As you reflect on this grim reality, consider the thin, often invisible lines criminals cross in pursuit of power and profit. These lines, once crossed, rarely lead back to safety. If you're drawn to the shadows where such fates are sealed, watch closely as we explore the stories of those who dared to overstep these boundaries and paid the ultimate price. The next Shadow Crimes video will take you deeper into the chilling consequences of crossing the invisible lines that govern the underworld. Prepare to confront the unsettling truth that in this dark world, usefulness is not a blessing, it is a sentence.